As a plumber, I've dealt with my fair share of disgusting jobs, but just recently, something happened that tops them all. I was called to an old house owned by an elderly woman. She had complained of a strange smell and issues with her plumbing, so I arrived early in the morning to check it out. As I gathered my equipment and prepared for work, I saw her adult son pull up and park his pickup in the driveway. He looked at me with a weird intensity and a surly look, not even nodding in my direction or anything, and marched into the house. I shrugged it off and found a spot in the crawl space under the house where I could find the likely source of the plumbing issues. The crawl space was tight and dark, and the smell was far worse than I anticipated. I slid through the narrow space, my small flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. As I crawled towards a piling, I noticed something unusual ahead. My heart began to race as the beam of my flashlight revealed more than I wanted to see. Propped against the far side of the piling was a human torso, almost completely skeletal. I froze, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. For an instant, I thought it must be fake, something left over from Halloween or some sick joke. But as I stared at the bones before me in this tight, damp space, I knew it was real. Panic set in, and I scrambled to get out of there, hitting my head painfully against the low-hanging floor above the crawl space. Gasping for air, I finally made it out from under the house and ran to the front door. "Ma'am, you need to call the police," I stammered, trying to catch my breath. There's a body under your house." The old woman's eyes widened in shock, and she reached for the wall phone behind her in the kitchen to call the police. I saw her son, with his back turned, eating at the kitchen table, silently go motionless and stiff. Something told me I had to get out of that house, and I quickly told her I'd be outside. I ran to wait in my van parked on the street, and my mind was racing. As I waited, I watched the silent house and saw nothing change. The thought that I was in danger was palpable, and I didn't know how long I wanted to wait there, assuming the police had even been called. After a little over 10 tense minutes, the police finally arrived. I guided them to the crawl space entrance, my hands still shaking. I explained everything, and while we were talking, the old woman had silently joined us at the back of the house. The cop crawled under and disappeared from view for a few moments. When he reemerged, he said there was nothing there. I shined my light into the crawl space to the exact spot, and sure enough, it was empty. The cops looked at me skeptically, and I knew what they were thinking, that I was crazy or just trying to pull some prank. I insisted it was right there. Someone must have moved it. The police said they would send cadaver dogs in to search, but I could tell they didn't fully believe me. I gave my statement detailing everything I'd seen, but I didn't wait for the dogs to arrive. I just wanted to get the hell away from that house as soon as possible. When I rounded the corner of the house, I saw the son's pickup was gone from the driveway. That he had moved it was the only explanation that made sense. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. What had really happened at that house? Who moved the torso? And most importantly, what had become of the body? I kept checking the news, but there was never any mention of a discovery or an arrest. It was as if the whole thing had just never happened. But I know what I saw. That skeletal torso, that weird son, and the fact that he had disappeared in the middle of all the commotion, it's all too real to be explained away by my imagination. I hope there's an investigation going on, that they can find that body, because I know what I saw was real. I worked nights as an Uber Eats driver for a few months to help with bills. I'd sometimes have to wait for the food to be packed up, and that's when I'd usually step outside, smoke a cigarette, and scroll through my phone. I did regular pickups at a small Italian place that stayed open pretty late. It didn't have much parking out front, so they asked drivers to park in the alley out back for order pickups. The alley was always dimly lit, with only a few streetlights. One evening, as I waited for my last order of the night to be packed up, I stepped out for a smoke. The hum of the city was distant, and the alley strangely quiet. The night was cool and breezy for late summer, and the rustling of the leaves on the nearby trees made me think about fall. I lit my cigarette and scrolled through my phone, leaning against my car. When I finished my smoke, I flicked it towards the sewer grate nearby and heard the familiar hiss as the water below extinguished the burning embers. As I turned to go check on the order, I heard it, a sound that made me freeze. I heard a faint splashing sound, like footsteps, and with each step, it was getting louder. I turned back towards the end of the alley, expecting to see someone running, but I was alone. The sound was coming from the grate. Before I had a chance to turn on my phone's flashlight, the steps halted. What if it was an animal trapped inside there? It didn't sound like something small. I aimed the light towards the grate and approached. With the light cutting through the darkness, I saw it, a face staring up at me from the sewer. It was the face of a young woman, her eyes wide and unblinking. The rest of her body was hidden in the shadows. It was just her face, like it was hovering in the darkness. I couldn't move. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I couldn't even breathe. The woman's face was pale, ghostly, and emaciated. Her hair floated around her like she was submerged in water. But she didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I almost dropped my phone in my panic. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. As I backed away, the face vanished. I heard the footsteps again splashing away into the dark depths of the sewer, leaving me in silence. I stood there, shaken, trying to process what I'd just seen. Was it real? Had I imagined it? The image of that woman's face burned into my mind, and to this day I could draw her as if I had just seen her. I rushed back inside, my hands trembling as they handed me the order. I didn't tell them what I'd seen. I knew they would think I was crazy. I had trouble getting to sleep that night, and when I finally did, I had nightmares about that woman's face. I never parked in that alley again. I didn't care if they yelled at me, but they never even noticed. That was over a year ago, and because of my work schedule, I don't do night deliveries anymore. Sometimes I wonder if what I saw was real, or if she was just a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I know that woman was real in some sense. Whether she was someone living or hiding in that sewer, or she was something paranormal, I just don't know. Up until this incident, I loved living alone in my small urban house in Seattle. I especially loved rainy nights, which we get a lot of. I love to paint after work and find the rain sounds soothing and meditative, especially before bed. But now, these rainy nights alone feel unsettling. My small house has a secure fenced-in backyard, perfect for my little dog Bella to use the bathroom. One side of the kitchen faces the backyard with a large sliding glass door, which I kept unlocked while I was home. I would generally let her out into the yard while I washed my paintbrushes before bed. If the light was on outside, I could watch her, but if I forgot to turn it on, I would look up to see my own reflection in the glass against the darkness outside. On this particular dreary night, the rain was falling hard and pelted the roof for hours. I painted until I heard a lull in the rain and started cleaning up my painting mess. Bella, who's always by my side, is a medium-sized mutt with a protective nature and never fails to alert me to any sounds outside. But this evening, she was low-key and calm. She did her usual hanging around the glass door, tail wagging gently, which is how she shows me she's interested in going outside to potty. Once I finished cleaning the brushes in the sink, I grabbed my boots from the corner and began pulling them on, and since the rain had been relentless, I didn't want to step outside without them. I figured I'd accompany her to go potty that night. Heavy rain meant frogs, and I didn't want to chase her around the yard while she chased the frogs. As I reached for the handle of the sliding glass door, I glanced up, expecting to see the familiar darkened outline of my backyard. Instead, my heart leapt into my throat. Standing just beyond the unlocked glass door was a man, drenched from the rain, staring directly at me. He looked unkempt, with hair plastered to his forehead and clothes clinging to his thin frame. The intensity of his stare sent a chill down my spine, and I stumbled backward, my eyes wide with shock. What unnerved me most was Bella's reaction, or lack thereof. Normally she would bark at anything unfamiliar, her protective instincts kicking in immediately. But that night, she was eerily calm, as if the guy's presence was nothing out of the ordinary. I stared at the man, my mind racing. Who was he? How did he get into my fenced backyard? The glass was streaked with rain, making it hard to make out his features clearly, but his presence was unmistakable. As I watched, he seemed to just dissolve into the darkness, blending into the night beyond the glow of my kitchen light. Desperate to make sense of it, I reached for the light switch and flicked it on. With the backyard instantly lit, it revealed nothing but the empty porch. There was no sign of the guy, not even muddy footprints in the rain-soaked ground. It was as if he'd never been there at all. The pit in my stomach kept me rooted in place, but if I didn't step out, I wouldn't know where he went. Bella, now wagging her tail expectantly, was the only reassurance I had. Her normal behavior in that moment was unexplainable. There was no chance she would have missed seeing that guy. She'd been looking through the slider and couldn't have missed him. Something was deeply wrong. Summoning all my courage, I slid the door open and stepped out onto the porch, my boots squelching in the puddles. The air was thick with the smell of rain, and the only sounds were the patter of heavy droplets falling from the gutter and the distant hum of traffic. Bella trotted out beside me, her nose to the ground, but showing no signs of alertness, no interest in sniffing out the stranger. I cautiously circled the porch, scanning every corner, but there was nothing. No evidence that anyone had been there. The fence was intact and the gate was still locked. Reluctantly, I stepped back inside, this time locking the door behind me with trembling fingers. I had been watching a true crime show while I'd been painting, so maybe I had conjured the man into reality? Or maybe there really had been a guy standing there with a thin pane of unlocked glass door between us. From that night on, I made it a point to lock the sliding door religiously. That guy staring at me through the door is a memory I still can't shake. Living alone means having to confront fears by yourself in the dead of night. And that guy at the glass was a reminder that some fears are more than just figments of imagination. Even right now, as I sit by the light of my kitchen, the rain tapping against the windows, I occasionally glance at the sliding door. The reflection in the glass shows only my face with Bella at my feet. I hope to never again look into the darkness to see a stranger's face instead of my own. If you like these stories, this is the place for you. I cover scary stories about ghosts, cryptids, paranormal events, and disturbing, creepy human encounters. My Etsy store is open if you'd like to support me there. The link's in the description. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.